So I'm Ahmed Kashkash. I'm a master's thesis student here at KTH and at INSA de Lyon in France. And I'm going to be presenting my project today, analyzing user behavior and sentiment in music streaming services. So first, we'll do a quick introduction on the project. Then we'll talk about some relevant background, the data that we used and the methodology we followed. And then I will expose the results and discuss limitations and future work. Alright, so let's start with a quick introduction. So the motivation behind this project is that for streaming services such as Spotify, it's really important to understand users and understand their preferences. And these services collect large amounts of data from these users. But unfortunately, this data is rarely fully exploited. And most of the time, these companies use really traditional aggregated metrics. And they rarely do a more granular approach to this. So our contributions is that we explored some concepts that are underexploited in this field. We proposed a series of models for every one of these concepts, and we proposed practical applications that can help improve the user experience. So let's talk about some quick background so you understand what I'm talking about here. First, streaming services. So music streaming services have taken over the digital distribution of music. So the digital music now is bigger than physical sales, and streaming services now are bigger than platforms like iTunes. And Spotify specifically is the leading in this market with 75 million users, including more than 30 million premium subscribers. And but they're facing fierce competition from Apple and Google because they also got into this market. And Spotify specifically focuses a lot on recommender systems and recommendations that they give to users. So those are songs that Spotify gives users based on their taste. And because of this, it's really important for them to understand what users actually like. And usually the way to do so, there's two ways. The first is explicit feedback, where we ask users how much would you rate a certain item. Like on Netflix, I'm going to watch a movie and I'm going to give it 4 stars out of 5. So this sounds good, but it has a lot of problems. Like for example, it's really biased. The users that usually go and give ratings are not representatives of the general users. And it has some also problem with noisiness, and it's sparse. Like there aren't that many ratings given. The second way to do so is implicit feedback, where you try to infer a rating based on the actions of the behavior of a user. And that's the more popular thing currently at least. One example is, if I watched 6 episodes of a certain TV show, that probably means that I like this TV show, whereas if I watched like only 1 episode, we're not sure, so we're going to give a lower rating. But this has some problems, like we don't have any negative feedback since we only know things that you consume, and we can't say for sure that if you skipped something it means it's bad, and it has also some other problems. And the way you use this feedback, once you get it, like you just get a number, this user likes this much. Well, one example is matrix factorization machines, which are used to give recommendations. It's basically, we're filling a matrix with these ratings, like this user likes this item this much, and using a certain algorithm, we're going to generate recommendations. And the problem here, these days at least, is not as much the algorithm as it is the data. The quality of these ratings, it's really hard to get ratings that really represent how well the users feel about this. So that's the challenge currently. There's also, from the business side, these companies do a lot of A/B tests. They try to monitor how the users behave on these platforms, and so they really need robust metrics. But the metrics that are currently popular, like the length of a session, of a listening session, or how much people skip songs, these business metrics are not really robust because they're sensitive to noise and some user behavior that is common in streaming services. And we're going to talk about this later. Alright, so let's talk a bit about the data that we used in our methodology. So we focused on one main dataset called N songs in Spotify. And this is a dataset with every row is a song that was streamed. And we have information on these streams like which user streamed, which song did they stream, why was the stream ended, which platform did they use, etc. So it's really relevant to our research. And after pre-processing, we have approximately 685,000 rows with 39 features. And the way we sampled this data is that we took a subset of Spotify users and we took all their streams during the month of November 2015. The reason we didn't just randomly sample streams from the platform is because doing so, we would get a very small amount of information per user, and our research focuses more on understanding individual users. So we wanted to get all the info about a smaller subset of users without being biased. And so the way we did this project is that we tried to build a model for how our users behave with three main facets. The first one is streaming context, the second is user attention, and the last one is the sequential analysis of user actions. And we're going to talk about these in the results section. So the first results we have is about the streaming context section. So context is really important when talking about streaming services. And here what we mean by context is all what is not related to the actual content that is being streamed. So for example, if you're streaming a song on a mobile phone while using a premium Spotify account, and the last action you did is a skip, that's what we call your context when streaming that song. And the reason this is really important is regardless of the content you're streaming, certain contexts will tend to make you behave in different ways. So maybe the same action in different contexts can have different meanings. So for instance, if you're on mobile, you will tend to skip more, but if you're on desktop, you skip less. That means if you skip something on desktop, it's less important. And we can see the effect this has by looking at these graphs. So the first graph shows on different platforms how much of a song is completed. This is a histogram. And what we can see is that mobile users, for instance, they tend to end songs really early compared to the other users. And this is even bigger when we combine multiple variables, like combining platform and type of account. So we can see that like premium mobile users, the blue bar, have a skip ratio that is way bigger than the other platforms. And this shows us that the context really has a big impact on a user's behavior. And this is regardless of the song you're streaming, whether you like it or not. Even keeping these parameters constant, there's also the bias induced by every user because these users are not the same. Some users are simply more focused on music discovery while others just listen to the same artist over and over again. And because of this, some users will behave in a different way. And so to understand really what they like, we have to consider them separately. And so basically what we're trying to do here is we're trying to separate the impact of the content from the impact of the context. Because what we really care about is what the users think of the content. We want to remove the bias induced by the context they're in. And to do so, we need to build a model for this context. So there's many ways to do so. A traditional approach is to separate users or streams in groups, sometimes called cohorts. And in these groups, we want to keep some variables constant. So for instance, to avoid the bias induced by the type of device you're using and the type of plan you're using, we're going to separate users into three groups where they're using the same platform and the same type of plan. That way we can do some analysis. So this works for some type of analyses, but it has a lot of drawbacks. One major drawback is that the size of the data is drastically reduced, especially when we have a lot of variables. So we can use more sophisticated models. And it also doesn't actually analyze the impact of every one of these variables. It just tries to basically negate it. And it also doesn't scale well on the scale of the data that Spotify has. So our approach is that we propose to use a machine learning model to analyze the impact these variables have on actions done by the users, such as skipping songs. And the way we do so is that we take machine learning models, we train them on all the historical data we collected, and we use the contextual variables like platform feature as input, and the output that the target is whether a song was skipped or not. This way we learn, regardless of content, what is the most likely output. And so we evaluated many models. The models we evaluated are logistic regression, random forest, gradient boosting trees, naive Bayes, and decision tree. Naive Bayes and decision tree, which do not seem anyway really appropriate for this problem, didn't perform well. And we actually have a very good performance. So this is something called a ROC curve. And actually it's surprising that just using the context of a user, we're able to predict this well if they're going to skip or not. And this is because of something we'll see in the late chapter, because there's usually a succession of actions that is really predictable. So from this, what we can build is something called stream polarity. And the intuition is that the more something is expected, the less important it is. So if you're in a context where you're really prone to skip, and you do skip, that's not really very, very negative. But imagine you're in a context where it's really hard for you to skip, and you still take your phone out of your pocket and click on next. then that's probably more negative than the other actions. So this is the intuition we have here. And what we do is we calculate the likelihood of a user skipping given his context. And then we calculate the difference between that and the action they actually did. And this gives us a curve that looks like this. So the green points are negative actions. So in our case, that's skips. The green ones are positive ones. That's finishing the song. And we can notice that even in the same session, the user will change contexts. So for instance, the action starting a song will not be the same all the time. Maybe they will switch from one platform to the other. Maybe they will switch the feature they're using, etc. Tells us how good a session is to simply integrate this curve. The reason we do this instead of just calculating an average is because we notice that skip events usually happen in a quick succession. It's common to have 10 skipped songs in a row, and we don't want to give those too much importance. So we take the time spent doing those actions into consideration by doing an integral. And we can see the session on the right is more positive. We can also aggregate this over users to get a sense of how satisfied or positive the user experience is. And we've done some experiments in the reports that show that there are some correlations between this and conversion, for instance. So there's many applications for this. It can be used in A/B tests as a metric to evaluate if a feature improves user satisfaction. It can be used to analyze, like based on demographics or new countries, how the user experience is compared to other places. And it can be used in recommender systems because it also gives us a negative feedback with a confidence measure, which is always nice. And the next section now is user attention. So first we have to talk about what some call an attention economy. So today a lot of services are competing for our attention. And we're always on our phones and computers, and it's getting harder and harder to actually catch the user's attention. And because of this, it's really important for these platforms to have an idea of how active the users are while using their service. Do they just put it in the background and not touch it again, or do they actually play with it constantly? And currently there is nothing in place to do so. So to see the impact that attention has, we can look at this graph. So from red to light blue, what we have here is sessions that have a certain number of interruptions. The one in red have one interruption. That means you started the application, streamed some songs, and didn't do any other action. The blue one is 2 interruptions. That means you started the app, played some songs, and then somewhere in the middle did another action. And there it goes. And what we see is that the more interruptions, the more you interrupt the listening session, the longer this session will last. What this means is that when you're actually engaged with the service, you will tend to stay longer. And this is usually something that we want. We want users to stay longer. And to do so, to model this, we can look at passive and active events. And in this context, passive events is something that doesn't necessarily have, it's something that is done without the user's intervention. So for instance, a song starting automatically or a song finishing automatically. And active events is something that the user did, like skipping a song, closing the app, or seeking through a song or things like this. And we use these events. And if you look at a session, so here the red dots are the active events and the blue dots are passive events. It's probably hard to see for those in the back, but we often have a lot of red dots one after the other, and the same is true for the blue dots. So what this means is that when an active event happens, it is more likely to get active events after it. We notice this throughout sessions. And so because of this, there's a specific type of model called self-excitatory point processes that seems appropriate for this. So we chose to go for something a bit simpler, and we only considered that the likelihood of having an active event only depends on the distance from the last active event that happened, which means the more time goes, the more your attention decays, basically. And this looks like this. So this is the session before where our model applied. So basically, every time an active event happens, the attention level goes to 1, and it decays exponentially. And this is a very simplistic model, but it already gives us an idea of how active a session is, simply by doing the same as before, integrating this curve. So as you can see, on the session on the left has a lot of active events interrupting the session. So it seems pretty active, and the one on the right that has a lot of passivity. And this is reflected by our measure of the integral of this attention level. This can also be used for recommendations. So sometimes we start the app and we forget it, we just leave. Or we're playing music in the background and we can't actually skip. And when that happens, we don't necessarily want to give those songs a lot of importance when trying to build recommendations, because we're not sure if the users are actually listening to the songs. Maybe they just left the app running in the background. There's other applications like monitoring the level of attention throughout platforms, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So now the last section, sequential analysis. So all the type of analyses we discussed so far have been rather aggregated, and the traditional metrics that people use in streaming services are also aggregated over users, aggregated over sessions. We rarely actually look at every action chronologically. We lose on this information. But the problem is, on these streaming services, all the actions taken by the users are actually related to each other, so it's interesting to look at them this way. So one very simple model to do so is Markov chain analysis. So in a Markov chain, the probability of having an action only depends on the last action you did. So what that means is, given that the last action you did is skip the song, how likely it is that you would skip a song again. So this is what we see here. And this is a very simple model, but we can already notice some things, such as the fact that users tend to do the same action over and over again. So if you skip a song, you have a 75% chance of skipping another song after that. If you click on a song, you have a 58% chance of clicking again. If you finish a song, you have an 84% chance of finishing the next song. And we also notice that when you click on a song, you're more likely to actually listen to it because it's something you chose voluntarily. So this is good. We can also use another approach, which is something called the hidden Markov models. And we can consider that our users have some latent states. Those are states we can't observe. It's like the user is currently in a happy mood, or the user is currently in a discovery-oriented mood. And the way we can find which states the user are in is by observing the actions they do. So we did use this model, and it gave some interesting results. But unfortunately, we don't see, as of now, any practical applications for this, although there is some research being done at Spotify to do so. So there's some applications for these models. All these models fit certain transition probabilities, and these can be useful to classify users. So if we notice that some users behave in a certain way, and those users tend to convert to the premium accounts, maybe we want to monitor which users are the same. Another way to do so, to use these, is for fraud detection. Because if we see that a user behaves really weirdly, they do not follow the same patterns, then most likely that is not a human user, that is probably a robot. And this is a problem that Spotify is starting to have. So this is all interesting, but unfortunately we didn't find any practical applications, and we think this needs to be researched more in depth. So we explored some facets of streaming services that are not fully exploited currently. We believe that the stream polarity and user attention models are really interesting, can be used as of now in many applications at Spotify, and can also be used jointly, for instance, to improve recommendations. And this has many applications, either for analytics, for business metrics, or, like we said, for recommendations. So there are some limitations to this project. We have to evaluate some more sophisticated models for the attention level part. The stream polarity as well has to be evaluated for recommendation systems. So currently we think that it would be better than the implicit feedback currently used, which is just ones and zeros. But it needs to be thoroughly evaluated. And the sequential analysis part wasn't really research in depth, but there is some research being done currently at Spotify in that sense. And that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Very nice presentation. I think it was really clearly and good structure, I would say. You said that this field is underexploited, it just haven't been studied so much. Do you have any explanation to that, or do you see why is it like that? Or because they have all this data, it should be something interesting to study. Why have it done?
Yeah, so there was a lot of research, but the people were more aiming for the low-hanging fruits. So trying to say, oh, this user played this song 60 times, so they probably like it. So that is actually a good idea, and that's what people currently do in implicit feedback. But there are some things that are a bit harder to do, like using a lot of diverse variables. And I feel like in the research, at least the related works I did, most of the research focuses on the algorithms, like for instance, for recommendation. the research focuses really on the algorithms instead of focusing on this data. There's also another possibility is that this data is hard to access.
Yeah.
So if you're not Spotify, there's no way you can do this type of research, unfortunately. There's no openly available data set that has this user played this on this platform with this plan, because it's really sensitive from a business point of view.
But they are doing a lot of research
So,
intern, but they maybe not enough
I
publishing.
mean, Spotify now is trying to publish more and do this type of research. But yeah, probably now with Apple and Google and Amazon getting in this field, we will see more research in this sense, I think.
Okay. Another question about the user attention. Then you just wrote shortly in a report about application in alpha beta testing. Would you like to explain that a little bit more?
So imagine I'm going to give you an example. Spotify introduced a feature recently called Party, and that's a feature where you just put some music in the background and Spotify plays like you're a DJ. It's going to change the mood of the party and everything. So this is an example of a feature where we want users to be passive. We don't want them to have to go to the app every time and click on a couple buttons because they didn't like the songs. So in this sense, like monitoring how this feature diverges from the others, from the activity point of view, could be interesting. We can also notice when there's a bug in the app, users will tend to have more actions and basically have a behavior that is different from what we usually notice. And I believe that even for things like this, bug testing, this could be interesting.
And then you say that you have this correlation between this polarity measurement of and then with the conversion rate and so on. But you are also quite vague about how strong is this? And
I didn't put that in my presentation. It was on my presentation before because I believe the data is too small to really make any conclusions. Now I do say that in the report. I say there's a major caveat is that the data is really limited, and that's because I only looked at 5 months or 4 months. And the number of people that were free in November and then converted in those 3 months in my data set is really small.
But the process of extracting data, that included a lot of manual work? Because was it hard to extract more data to do this analysis? Or
it shouldn't involve a lot of manual work because they have a lot of pipelines in line to make it easier, but it did because they just recently switched from on-site cluster to using Google Cloud. So it was a bit messy, and also I think I didn't want to rerun all my experiments with different data at that point because this research was done towards the end, and so I chose to just say, okay, this is interesting. Maybe you should run this with more data.
Because it would have been interesting to see a little bit more data.
I mean, it is likely that there's some type of correlation, and they will check this actually. They will run this with more data soon.
And then I also have there's more focusing on the report than because I think it was very clearly in this presentation. But there are some things that was much more unclear when you read the report. So maybe could you give more feedback afterwards if you want to. Because I think I really got the impression that you have interesting results. You present them quite nicely, but then the parts around doesn't give you the introduction needed, and that's a problem.
That is true.
But you are able to give a good introduction, so I think you should just focus on this part.
Not many people will read the report, and probably more people attended this presentation, so that's probably a good thing.
I could.
You're done?
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
Do you take into consideration for the user attention, for instance, through time? Do you take into consideration the time of every song? Because I guess if you have a longer song, then you mainly you're gonna interact more or whatever.
No, we don't really take that into consideration because if it's a song that lasts an hour, probably after that hour you're not active. When the next song starts, so it makes sense to only take into consideration when the song starts. If you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Because
Okay, other questions? Yeah?
Yeah.
Like today when they do A/B testing,
Yeah.
you said that they looked at average values like skip rate. So if one group skips more or less than which is bad, this is where this fits in, right? Where you can fit in context.
Yeah, exactly. So for an example is if a certain context is likely to skip anyway, or we're doing an A/B test on a certain feature where there is people skip a lot, and maybe we're doing an A/B test with another feature where people do not skip. It seems unfair to say, oh, like we have a skip ratio that increased, and that's bad, and we should stop this. Maybe this feature is used more by mobile users, which skip anyway. And they are actually trying to, like I said, when running these tests, they're trying to eliminate this bias. Like, we're gonna only look at this same users, but that's limited. Like simply like splitting users in groups doesn't work really well. So I think this could be an interesting approach, and this can also just complement this approach, just like adding one more metric, skip ratio, and then stream polarity or something. Yeah.